I think the general public connotation of a fight is, two dudes squaring off in a parking lot.
I've trained individuals that think a fight is whatever that silly crap they did in a bar was. I also know that some people believe, depending on who I'm training, the fight is basically anything that ends where at least one person dies. Like, like there's an extreme difference between two people's definition. Ryan,
What's up?
welcome to the Elite U. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, man. Thanks you.
All right, brother. Could you introduce yourself to to everybody watching, a little bit about your background? Talk about the brand a little bit.
So I'm Ryan Hoover. Started Fit to Fight 2008. Had a training center for 5 or 6 years before that. Background wrestling, a little bit of boxing, Muay Thai. People kind of know me for Krav Maga, though I've kind of moved past and beyond that. But I spent a lot of time there, and I did learn some things. Had some instructors that taught me a lot, not necessarily on the technical side, but the mindset side of things. And so I don't have any super secret ninja squirrel background. It's straight up like I've just devoted my adult life to training and learning about violence and how to deal with it. I've always been small, and so growing up, I had to learn to run fast and talk well and fight. And at some point I had to use all of those throughout kind of growing up. So like most people, I did some traditional martial arts, but I was kind of later in life with that for me, just because I didn't have an opportunity when I was younger. But then at some point I was like, this doesn't look like any of the fights that I've ever been in.
Right.
It just didn't like. Now, I'm kind of embarrassed that it took me as long as it did to come to that realization, because you get this kind of, I think, fascination with the martial arts mystique.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to buy into that. You want to be Bruce Lee. You want to, you want to emulate that kind of stuff. But then at some point I'm like, God, this is just no fight I've ever been in. Like I've been bounced off of cars, and like no fight ever looked like any of this stuff we're doing. And then that took me to Krav Maga, which I didn't know anything about. I'd never really heard of it. On the East Coast at the time, we're talking about late 90s, early 2000s. It really wasn't a thing. Right. I just happened to see a magazine article about it, and I was like, this sounds like what I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. So I kind of dove headfirst into that for a while, but at the same time, I was, I started Jiu-Jitsu in '98. I went to Thailand, trained Muay Thai. I was doing a lot of other things to kind of enhance the skill sets that I was learning from the mindset point of view from Krav Maga.
Right.
And then kind of post Krav Maga, I just got to a point where I'm like, there's a lot of gaps here. Yeah. It's a lot of stand up. And the ground stuff is, well, don't go to the ground. But if you go to the ground, get up.
Yeah.
And then there was very little transition in between. And in my experience, just in fighting and in seeing fights are won and lost in the clinch.
Right.
And that was just something that it didn't really exist in a lot of reality-based self-defense kind of circles. And
now, are you so in the Krav Maga, if you go back just a little bit, was your study or your research to be done just for personal development, or were you looking at it from an instructor point of view that you wanted to pass on, and you were just not getting to areas that you felt were fully developed?
Yeah, it was both. Initially, it was because I had a black belt in a couple of traditional martial arts, and I was teaching a little bit because that's what you do, but I was like, I don't think these people could actually defend themselves if they had to.
Right.
Like they're going through the moves and they're memorizing the techniques, and they do fine in a test, but I don't think any of them could fight sleep if they had to.
Right.
So while I wanted to be a better practitioner and have a better understanding of how to transfer information, I had a good understanding of violence, but I didn't have a good understanding of, I don't think, of how to get other people there. So it's kind of a duality for me. I wanted to get better, but I think it was more I wanted to be able to impart that to other people, and I didn't feel like I was doing that well.
Now, was there anything about the martial arts that you felt, if you were to break it down into what they call micro fights, like you could implement as long as they had the understanding of violence? Was that something that you could not cherry pick, but just
right? Yeah, I think so. I mean, I definitely learned some things about, just body control, how to move. I learned how to develop power. I spent a little bit of time with a guy that was hard Kyokushin Kai guy, like very hard. So learning how to develop good power with a small frame, So I don't want to discount it altogether, and I think it was necessary for my journey, to get me where I am now. So I wouldn't throw it away. And I do feel like there were some lessons there on how to teach. I mean, I learned a lot about how to teach, and I didn't realize it till 20 years later, probably. How to teach from, I used to train with, his name is Grandmaster Bobby Tabata in Balintawak, Arnis. Did a lot of private lessons with him. And the attribute building was phenomenal. And it was fun, but my eye-hand coordination, hand speed, that kind of stuff was off the charts at that time. But I didn't know to credit him with learning how to transfer information until it just hit me like 20 years later that I learned a lot about how to teach from him. Right. So there were definitely a lot of lessons there that I wouldn't just discount or throw away. And I'm grateful that I had those opportunities. So I wouldn't know what I know now if I hadn't gone through that.
Of course, right. So you sought out Krav Maga, and what were the pros and cons to your?
The pros were definitely, look, I don't think anybody, you could argue jiu-jitsu, but I don't think anybody was reaching an adult market the way Krav Maga was in terms of getting people to understand traditional martial arts maybe isn't exactly the way, I mean, you can drive by any Taekwondo place and you're going to see dozens, if not hundreds of kids in little gis. And, and I think there's some value to it for kids. But to get adults to do that kind of thing is,
yes.
And so I think Krav Maga did that well. I had some instructors that I definitely learned a lot about from, on the physical fitness side, the mental toughness, the emotional toughness side of things, the mindset, some technical things, but mostly for me, it was more the kind of hard to quantify stuff, the being willing to do whatever it takes, the mindset that I think a lot of people don't really grasp or understand. And I'm not sure that it's an easy thing to teach, if you don't kind of have it somewhere in you. So I learned a lot about how to kind of get people to do that.
Right. Or at least think about it.
Yeah. At least, not go through the world with blinders on and think that there's going to be some kind of magical technique that's just going to end this for me.
Right. Yeah, for the military, when we're training them, the first thing that we try to focus on is that psychological conditioning, right? And it's a lot of times people look at it and they're like, well, why'd you teach that? It's like, well, we teach it because it's super important to take someone who is a good person, probably comes from a decent background, whatever it is, or have a group of just a variety of people and introduce them to violence and the psychology that they're going to need, or the conditioning. We used to call it inoculation to interpersonal violence. Like, you are just exposing them to a world that they don't actually come from. And even though you understand that at some point they may have to enter into that, the first part of it is that psychological part, that making it a normal part of your life. And is that what Krav does well? Is that
I think it does. I mean, even in my own, like, I own 2 training centers, and they're about 45 minutes apart, but the demographics are very different. One is much more blue collar. One is a lot more white collar, younger, single professional people. And in the blue collar one, I don't think we have to spend nearly as much time on how to impart what we're talking about.
Right.
They've had exposure, whereas in the other training center, and it may just be that it's a younger demographic. That may be a big part of it, but I do think that there's more to it than that. Some socioeconomic stuff. They haven't had that experience. They haven't seen, felt, smelled violence like up close. So we treat those groups differently. Ultimately, we're teaching them the same things, but how we get there is a little different.
Yeah.
You know, so the Krav Maga mindset and mentality, and the way of imparting it, I think, really is helpful with a group that it's not been a part of their lives.
But you're hinting at there's a direct shortcoming, right? So what is that?
When you talk in terms of self-defense, in our industry, I believe it's a marketing term. It has legal ramifications, so it's a legal term too. But in our industry, it's a marketing term. It's the white claw of fighting. It has really good marketing. It's favored by upper class suburbanites that likely will never touch violence. It's palatable enough to be passable, but there's really no danger in partaking in it. It kind of checks a lot of the right boxes, says a lot of the right things, but it's comfortable and it's trendy, and they're looking for, okay, what's the next big thing?
Right.
And I think that's overall a flaw, because when that is what's out there in front, then there's no impetus to push beyond that. If you're using those kinds of things to get people in the door, I get it. Right. But ultimately, I have to get them to understand it's not going to be, if I do A, he does B, I do C, he does D. That's not how violence works. Right. It's just not how fighting happens. It doesn't come from a manual. It doesn't come, if it's not principle based, if it's not based on sound concepts, if it's not me giving you the tools to make decisions in real time, to be able to deviate from whatever the initial kind of plan of attack was, then it's not going to be real. And I'm not being intellectually honest with my students. If I just, from a coaching standpoint, it's really easy for me to get in front of a group of people and say, look, all you have to do is, it's easy. And you want me to say that, as people coming in the door, you want somebody to just say, all right, well, just tell me what to do. Yes. Because it absolves you of any responsibility. It absolves you of any real work that has to come from the training that is needed. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is teach people how to fight, right, as opposed to teaching self-defense. I've never in my life seen someone self-defense themselves. Like, I've never seen that. I've seen a lot of people fighting. And the initial thing may be, okay, your hands are around my neck and maybe I do something. But how did we get there? Right. You didn't fall from the ceiling and just put your hands around my throat. You didn't materialize out of thin air. Like, there was pre-contact there. There was an opportunity for me to maybe de-escalate. There was an opportunity maybe for me to preempt, hit you first. But even if we got past all of that and your hands end up around my neck, so maybe I do some kind of a move to get your hands off my neck, but then what? I got to know how to fight, because you're probably not just going to fall into a fetal position and be like, you bastard, and like fight's over. I need to be able to fight. So even if I failed preemption, I failed pre-contact, my initial move is to deal with whatever the threat was, the attack was you gave me, I still have to be able to fight. And I use it depends a lot, and people hate that. People hate when you say, well, it depends. Circumstances dictate, totality of circumstance, because we could take the exact same scenario and we could drop 6 different people in it, and they're all going to respond in a little bit different way.
Right.
It would be insane for me to try to teach you to fight the same way that I would try to teach Amber to fight.
Right.
How does it make sense? You have different backgrounds, different experiences, different attributes, different mindsets, different mentalities. The principles are going to be the same, right? The principles that drive good fighting, dealing with violence, whatever, those are the same.
Mm-hmm.
But the application of them is going to be a little bit different based on your experience, your willingness, your emotional toughness, your physical attributes, all those things. And what a lot of self-defense systems try to do is put everybody in this box. Right. It's we're going to cookie cutter stamp out people, and it'll be good enough. And the reality is most of them can get away with it because it's never going to have to be really proven or disproven.
Right.
And you'll leave feeling good about yourself. You broke a sweat, you learned how to deal with the choke from the front, and
right.
Good to go. So I think that's the glaring issue in that we could get into the technical side, right? The clinch work is terrible, the groundwork is terrible. Like that's
so we don't have to go that far. There was a lot to unpack there. Let's go back. I agree with the majority of what you're saying. The parts that I guess I would disagree with is just something that I'm probably just misunderstanding. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it be a critique of all martial arts schools that in order to run an effective business, that you have to cater to the majority of your clientele, not upset their worldview too quickly? Therefore, by doing so, you are sugarcoating a lot of the areas that and could be considered lies that you plan to at some point in the future bring to bear, but maybe you don't because they're just not progressing well enough, and well, you can't do that too quickly or even at a long-term point because you're going to lose students, which commercializes whatever you want to call it, self-defense, personal protection. But that's all schools as a critique at some point, because technically, if you're doing something that's going to provide safety to them, you would psychologically condition them, almost destroy their worldview the moment they walked in, and you wouldn't have a school because...
Yeah. So I think there has to be a progression, right? It's like if I was going to teach you how to drive, and we went out back and we drove around the parking lot and you parked 10 times. And I'm like, dude, you just killed it. Let's head out to the interstate. Right. Well, surely there's something between the parking lot and the interstate, right? Maybe we go find a neighborhood and we drive around the cul-de-sac. And progressively, we're going to add stressors to what you're doing. But my goal ultimately is to get you on the interstate, right? And I'm going to tell you that straight up. Like in our classes, from day one, you're doing wrestling drills, you're pummeling, you're doing arm drags, you're chest to chest with somebody. And for people that have never punched another person in the face, or maybe even thought about it, or never grabbed another human or whatever, that's daunting, you know. But I think we've done it in a way that even folks that have an aversion to violence, being that close to somebody, the totality of the environment that we've created is welcoming enough to where they understand that they're in a safe place, that we are professionals at what we do, and we have a track record for achieving the goals that you came here to achieve. a lot of my experience, a lot of self-defense places, reality-based self-defense, whatever. A lot of, the environment itself is not conducive to the people that really need what it is that we're doing.
Right.
The people that really need what we do are the people less likely to go do it because it's daunting. It's scary. Because if it weren't, they wouldn't need it.
Yeah.
So if your place is skulls and flames and every instructor is running around like they're running a boot camp, and it's dark and dingy and whatever, that's gonna attract a certain demographic, right? Is it the demographic that you want? Great, nothing wrong with that, as long as you understand that the average 35-year-old accountant or 40-year-old housewife or whatever, they're not going to be drawn to that. So my goal is to reach the people that really need what it is I'm doing. It's like when we run law enforcement classes. The cops that normally show up, the ones that don't really need it. They're the ones that can already get after it.
It's volunteer, yeah.
They can already go. They know how to fight. They know when to turn it on, when to turn it off.
Right.
The ones that really need it, they don't show up. They don't come. We allow students, police officers, to train with us for free up to blue belt in jiu-jitsu. So few come and do it, and the ones that do, they're in the Marines. Now they're a cop. They already have the right mindset, the right mentality. Which I'm glad they come. I'm grateful for it. But the ones that really should be there, they don't show up because they don't want to get on the mat, touch hands with a 17-year-old kid that's going to turn them into a pretzel.
Right. Well, it's from my experience, it's almost an ignorance is bliss thing. They have a very, very tough job, and what happens is, the more you understand the type of people that are walking around and their capabilities, the more you realize that those people could be anyone that you are having a conversation with. And it truly highlights how much or how dangerous their job can be. And the thing is that a lot of law enforcement officers don't want to deal with that, from my experience.
Yep.
And I have a similar experience. I ran multiple schools, and the last school I ran was out of Navarre, Florida, and Fort Walton Beach is close to it. And I offered law enforcement to train for free in everything that we did, and I couldn't get a single person to come in. In fact, 7th group moved close to the area, and I had trained them from Fayetteville. And it took me walking into the police departments going, I am going to provide training and just a brief on this is what was taught. And we gathered everyone together, and the whole promise was they didn't have to do anything. All they had to do was stand up against the wall, and I would show what we taught them for 10 years. And this is the type of personnel walking around. And the only reason we did that was because they had a way of dealing with the young airmen that I felt was a little bit too hands-on.
Yep.
And if somebody was from a special operations background and they got intoxicated, you probably wouldn't want to do that. But back to your point, yeah, you're dealing with law enforcement officers that have the ability to train, but it's very, very difficult to get them to do so. But isn't that kind of what Krav Maga is supposed to tailor towards?
Yeah.
And do you use Krav Maga as a launching platform to what you train, or is it completely far and away from it? Like how
our programs are, I would say, if I had to put a percentage to it, 60% wrestling, vertical, ton of clinch work, Greco, my Krav Maga from a law enforcement perspective, I don't think it really, I get that that's the marketing. I don't think it really matches what it should for the goals. if you have a good understanding of use of force continuums and stuff like that, I can't just, because a dude's being resistive, I can't kick him in the nuts and knee him in the face. And like, you know, I need to be able to put my hands on him and get control of him and put him to the ground and actually have control of him before I go to try to cuff him, you know. I understand that there's sometimes going to be a need for me to kick him in the nuts and knee him in the face.
Right.
But it's going to be much higher up on the use of force continuum. And the vast majority of police officers, in my experience, rarely have to go to higher force.
Right.
But maybe a few times a week, depending on where they're working, they're having to go hands on, you know. And there's a great void there,
right.
You know, and being able to I mean, it's not a simple thing to take another adult human and make them do a thing that you don't want them to, that they don't want to do.
Right.
You know, if you don't have superior size, strength, skill, and I mean, again, depending on where you work, you take let's say a 22-year-old cop straight out of the academy in North Carolina, he got 40 hours of DT training. 8 hours of that was lecture. The other 32 was, you know, memorizing a bunch of pressure points. And now you drop him in a neighborhood that he doesn't understand, a demographic he doesn't understand. He's pulling over somebody that's had 3 fights in the past week, and this dude's never played a contact sport.
Right.
He's going to have use of force problems, or he's going to get beat to death. Because he's a human, he's going to get scared. Now he goes to a gun when somebody like Jimmy the Wolverine's around here somewhere. That dude's going to be able to go hands on and be able to have the confidence to be able to.
Yeah.
You can't. You want to talk about verbal judo and de-escalation, and cops need to be able to. Okay, that's fine, but you can't do that if you can't fight. I can't competently de-escalate somebody if I don't have the ability to fight them if it goes sideways.
Right.
Because I can get close to you, I can talk to you, I can be calm, I can be relaxed, because I know that if it goes sideways, I can take it up to the level that I need to take it up to. Yeah. If I don't have that ability, then my ability to de-escalate, to talk you down, is going to suck, because I'm going to appear nervous. I'm going to be twitchy. I'm not going to be willing to get that close to you. I'm going to be constantly wondering, where's my gun, you know? And so I for us, treating law enforcement like we treat civilians, you got to learn to fight. Right. If more police officers knew how to fight, you'd have way less use of force problems.
Yes, and 100% agree. But that would mean that, and we do this with the military training. Well, we do this with everything. Fighting is the foundation of your confidence and your ability to have a civil conversation. Like, I understand that if things go sideways, I have the capabilities to deal with the scenario. My father used to say, the highest point of any verbal argument is a physical confrontation. Right. He took it a little farther. Yeah. And he would state that if you could win any physical confrontation, meaning kill everyone in the room, that you could win all verbal arguments. And that's just wrong. But it does provide a mindset that your foundation should be something that revolves around fighting. And we believe that in everything, whether it be shooting, tactics, what have you. But the thing is that going back to the history, how far after Krav did you develop this mindset? Was this all applied during that time? You have 2 schools. Did that develop at the same time? Where's the history all the way up to like now?
Yeah. So what happened was, we were teaching a lot of seminars, and we were mostly teaching seminars in Krav Maga training centers, because that's the people that knew who we were. So that's the people that invited us to come teach. And without fail, the question would be, how do you run a fight program? Because what these centers were doing was, they would take that Krav Maga training mindset and mentality, and then they would try to apply that to a fight class. Well, you can't hit pads as hard as you want, as fast as you can, and then say, all right, put on your gloves, put on your shin guards, and let's bang. Because again, you're going to end up with 4 guys in your class. They're all going to look like you. And
I don't even know how to
yeah, you
deal
do.
with that comment.
Yeah, you do. They're all going to be people that don't really need that class,
Right.
you know? And so the more we internalize and look, well, what is it that we're doing that's different, that's unique in our training centers? And then we kind of like reverse engineered that. So what we were doing was we were basically, most people would take a fight class and, you start in boxing or kickboxing range.
Right.
Well, what we were doing was we were taking our fight class and we were starting in clinch range. We were starting here and then working our way out as opposed to starting here and then working the way in. Because if you start in boxing or kickboxing range, most people are most daunted about getting hit in the face, hit in the head. Where are you going to get the most amplitude in shots? Boxing and kickboxing range. Where are you going to take the most damage? Boxing and kickboxing range. So if you want people that have never been punched in the face before, have an aversion to that kind of thing, but that really need it, let's let them get used to some contact where they're not going to get lit up. They're not going to get their head snapped back. They're not going to, day one, end up with their nose on the other side of their face, because we're dealing with doctors and lawyers and attorneys and dentists and housewives and house dads and, people that have real regular lives. They're going to train twice a week, maybe 2-3 hours a week.
Right.
It's a small part of what they are and what they do.
And those are still extreme examples of hobbyists.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we start here, learning vertical wrestling, arm drags, pummeling, biceps pummeling, head clears, Russian arms, those kinds of things. Some tie clinch work, little trips, sweeps, that kind of stuff. Start open hand strikes to the body from here. So people kind of get, I don't know that inoculated is the right word, but they find out, okay, I can take a little bit of contact and it's not the worst thing in the world. And then we start slowly moving them out. So they get a good familiarity with touching someone, having someone touch them, having someone trying to stop them from doing what they're trying to do without being so worried about, I'm going to get knocked out. I'm going to get punched in the face. I'm going to get my nose broken. I'm going to whatever. And so that was kind of I would think the biggest kind of the genesis for our diversion from what everybody else in the Krav Maga world was doing at the time. We were teaching people how to fight, and we were doing it in a way that was different than what most people were doing. And then that just kind of, I started doing things in Europe where Krav Maga is everywhere, and there's like 40 different Krav Maga organizations, and it's all just it's a mess. But we were doing something that none of the rest of them were doing,
right?
And we were talking about, because they would try to say, well, Krav Maga is not a martial art. There's we're teaching self-defense. We're not teaching fighting. And I'm like, right, I understand all that. You're doing it wrong. Like, hey, Krav Maga is a martial art. You might not wear belts in class, but you give belts. You give certificates. In some classes, you're bowing to a photo on a wall. Like, it's the most martial art there is.
Yeah, it's Americanized.
Yeah.
What I would call it.
Yeah. So that was kind of the Fit to Fight genesis. Initially, Fit to Fight was just a program. It was a fight program.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that, we started having people come to us for more, because we were doing more in our centers. We just weren't disseminating it.
Right.
We were doing edged weapon stuff. We were doing firearm stuff. We were doing force on force stuff. We were doing more grappling, submission wrestling. And, we were doing a lot in my centers that I just wasn't putting out there. But once people started coming to us for one thing, they wanted to come to us for other things. And, it just kind of.
So you're talking about, and is that basically what pushed all the way to the success of the program up to this point? Is that just the mindset?
I think so.
So we're speaking about the same thing. We're talking about fighting. Is there a definition that you pass on, or is that just something that develops over time? because everybody thinks of things differently as a fight. Like I've trained individuals that think a fight is whatever that silly crap they did in a bar was. I also know that some people believe, depending on who I'm training, the fight is basically anything that ends where at least one person dies. Like, like there's an extreme difference between two people's definition. And based off of the fact that you have two successful programs or two successful schools with your programs, there has to be something that universally you guys can all center around.
Yeah. And I think the general public connotation of a fight is, two dudes squaring off in a parking lot. Okay. I think that's what people's mindset mentality kind of centers around. For us, a fight is some sort of interpersonal conflict that leads to violence. Mm-hmm. I use fight where most people use self-defense. Okay. When most people say self-defense, I say fight. Right. Which can be confusing to people. I totally understand that. And don't get me wrong, we use self-defense for marketing because that's if you don't, you're not gonna if I just put fight out there everywhere because the public connotation is two dudes squaring off in a parking lot, then we're not going to reach the people that we need to reach.
Right. So it's hard not to say self-defense.
Absolutely.
There's so many times where I say it, but the thing is everybody knows what I'm kind of talking about. So I understand the marketing side to that. It's just that where you're starting off from, for example, when I'm training close combat for a special forces team, their ability to fight has a different meaning than the average civilian, right? So I've always started from that level. First off, you should never be anywhere near a fight. Fighting is also a supplementary skill set to your ability to come home safe. Like it is just a piece of that pie, all your boxing skills, all your wrestling skills, all of that. It's just a small piece. But for the average civilian, I can see where the starting in those ranges is more palatable for them, even though it is more violent than the traditional way of doing it. When you start talking about the implementation of edge weapons, whether that be using it for your personal protection or defending against one as it comes out in an altercation, use of concealed weapons, or firearms. And then anything a little bit farther than that, we start talking about the use of words like topology and, never being attached to one range and whatever. But where does that training come in for you? Because obviously I can see a direct line on where your wrestling would come from, where your martial arts type skills come from. And then obviously wherever Krav, applies. So, how's that implemented? And, is that an advanced skill or is that something that's immediately?
Yeah. So I want to go back to the terminology for a second because I think it will tie into this. So we make a distinction between self-protection, and this is, this is probably only pertinent to us, germane to us, but self-protection is kind of the other things we talked about. Being smart about where I park my car, being mindful of things to mitigate even the chance of some sort of violence. Pre-contact range, the preemption range. Mm-hmm. Everything else, all the fighting stuff comes in because I failed that part.
Right.
So we make that distinction inside of our centers. So I think they have a better understanding of what we mean by fighting.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to edge weapon stuff, firearms, whatever, we come at it from the approach of, all right, I'm not fighting. I'm not knife fighting. I'm not gun fighting. I'm not stick fighting, whatever. I'm fighting and I have a knife. I'm fighting and I have a gun. I'm fighting and I have a stick. Because I think the danger becomes when it becomes knife fighting or stick fighting or gun fighting or whatever, it's very easy for the person to become weapon centric. Mm-hmm. I fixate on this thing, and you'll see it in dash cams and body cams a lot, where officers trying to get to their gun, and they're getting bounced off the hood of a car. They're getting punched in the face.
But doesn't that go right back to the fact that they didn't receive enough training? It's not that they're pistol centric. So like I run into guys that are very, very good with their pistol and in violent encounters. They just have a lot more pistol stuff and they just refuse to not go after their pistol. But in those scenarios, it's not just the fact that they don't have fighting ability. Like, it's not that they're centric around that pistol. It's like, it's the only thing they got.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
yeah. But it's the only thing they got because they can't fight. Right? Like, because that's why they're weapon centric. Right. Because they can't fight.
Yeah, but a knife guy is a knife guy regardless of, so meaning if you take somebody from a Filipino martial art, from my experience, and you give them ground fighting skills, and you give them wrestling skills, and you give them shooting skills, for whatever reason, if you're not careful, they will focus too much and try to draw into that area because it's where they love to be, right? So like there's two parts of that where it's like not only could you run the risk of getting them to fall in love and dedicate too much time to one area. The thing is that it's not the issue of law enforcement needs more training, but they also need training in all ranges, whether it be de-escalation to empty hand to whatever it is to use of an edge weapon if they have to their pistol, right? Like, but the thing is that they don't have any of that training. So when somebody in front of them poses a threat and they're intimidated and they don't want that person to get close, their hand goes to their pistol faster than if they understood that they could talk to that person and provide a little bit more comfort to the scenario. Whereas you have somebody else who's trained a lot and they still fall into the trap just because they've spent like 5 or 6 years on just, being a knife fighter. I know we'll get into that fun conversation, but I'm not picking on that. I'm just, it's just like gun guys that
right. Sure. You mentioned advanced, like for us, and this is probably oversimplifying, and there are probably some exceptions, but for us, advanced is I'm really good at the fundamentals, and then I'm gonna maybe add some variables to it.
Right.
I'm gonna increase the stress levels. So like for us, if you're going through our program, you're gonna start dealing with like edge weapon defense in what we would call level 4, but you're not learning a new technique. It's now I'm gonna take everything that I've learned for the past 18 months or whatever it is, and I'm going to implement it into dealing with this dude now has a knife. Right. So all of my controls, all of my push-pull energy, creating good angles, using my head to control space, all those kinds of things are relevant to how I deal with somebody that has a knife.
Right.
So it's not that all of a sudden I need a whole new technique. I need a whole new delivery system. I need to learn this whole new set of things because now there's a knife involved. Because again, if we're talking about the average person that's going to train twice a week or whatever, I can't have them fight one way for 18 months and then all of a sudden I'm going to introduce, well, here's a knife, so forget all of this shit, and we're gonna do this and this and this and whatever.
All of this stuff should, if it's properly taught, have the same types of movements and mindset and defense, but like that's at the very beginning of that. The introduction of knife defense and pistol stuff, or do you guys introduce use of as well as defense too? You're talking about like 18 months, like isn't that an extensive training time? Like what do you run classes where they get to those subject matters a little bit faster?
So we run a lot of supplemental workshops inside of our centers. So even if you're not at a certain level, you can come get exposure to those kinds of things.
Right.
And we have separate classes, like separate programs for close quarters firearms work. We have a program called Firearmed where it's the whole first level is inert training. It's using SIRT pistols and training guns and that kind of stuff. And it's mostly about being able to use empty hand skills in a close kind of fight range to get to my gun, keep my gun, get shots on target without me going to full presentation from here. So they can definitely get exposure to that without having done a year and a half of other training. So we have a firearms workshop next weekend that is open, but I want them to understand that if you don't have good wrestling sensibilities, if you don't have a good understanding of angles and being able to control space and those kinds of things, it's going to be a little bit more, all right, well, we're memorizing technical application right now, and your ability to make decisions in real time as the dynamics of the fight change is going to be less than it would have been if you had put in.
No, and that's a normal progressive mindset for any type of system that is trying to hit a large complexity of skills. Like the thing is that what you're talking about for personal protection or personal whatever the word was, that's life. It's just walking around, having a conversation on a regular basis, being able to position yourself every single time, because you no longer think about it in a way that keeps you safe, under being able to see an area and go, okay, these are the problems that probably could arise. I'm now on my phone. Like these are just normal habits that should have been passed on to these people that they, for whatever reason, they just weren't. They live in their little bubble, and then they're brought to you because of, at least in my experience, they're brought to me because they are either going to a place that their loved ones believe that they're going to be in danger, like school or out into the real world. And there's a huge conversation piece about, the only time that you bring them to some psycho like me is when you're going to let them leave your little bubble. Like that's not the time to introduce that world to them. Or what happens is violence has been introduced to their life already. And so they realize that the 70 and sunshine and just beautiful world that they thought they lived in is not what they live in.
Go away like that.
Correct. And the thing is that now you're trying to learn these skills. What I am gathering is you are talking about a systematic approach to skill sets that provide, how do I put this? That provide the best yield for a successful outcome. Okay. So like if I were to create a perfect scenario where I'm like, hey, I have from the age of 5 all the way to the age of 20, the ability to pass on all these skills, I would create a foundation of wrestling, grappling, striking. I don't know when you implement the psychological parts, the ones that make people go, ooh, and run away. I don't know when that's applied, but the thing is that would obviously be implemented. Understanding of violence and what have you, use of every type of weapon, whether it be improvised weapons to edge weapons to pistol to long gunning, just to understand how things progress as distance increases. But we also understand that the mom that is bringing in her daughter for college is there for you to train, and more than likely you're not going to get a dedicated 2 days a week for extended periods of time, right? So I like how the program works. The program gives you a full spectrum of skills if they stick around, right? You are focusing on the civilian populace is what I'm gathering. You talk about law enforcement, but even in law enforcement cases, they have a tendency, if they're dedicated, to come in, right? And it's a convincing part. It's the part, because I used to train senior officers, right? And they would be like, hey, Mike, I was told to come here because I know that even though you're training realistic, whatever you want to call it, stick a knife in someone's eye type training, I'm not going to go to my meeting on Monday with a black eye. And every other school in town technically does that. Like they force me to box. And even though that's a very powerful skill that I need. I understand that you are not going to force me to box because I have a, and it's not an excuse, but at the same time, whatever the training is has to mold to their life, right? And so that is the template for that. When you talked about the cookie cutter scenario, are you not just creating a very large cookie by doing it in this fashion?
I think there's some element to that, but so this is what we try to do. And if we use the cookie cutter, the cookie kind of analogy, I try to teach you how to bake a cookie, but I don't necessarily give you the ingredients. I give you a basic understanding of what I want to give you a framework. I want to give you the skeleton. It's up to you to build the muscle around it. So I'm not going to tell you if this then that. I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to say here's some general approaches to how to deal with this problem. But you're going to do it a little bit differently than Amber's going to do it.
Of course.
And so even from the standpoint of the way that we deliver information, the way that we transfer knowledge is very kind of Socratic. I want you to come to it almost on your own with just some guidance from me. Because if it's just me spoon feeding it to you, you don't ever really have ownership of it. You don't ever really understand it the way you would if you came to it by touching hands with somebody and pushing and pulling and then touching hands with somebody else and then touching hands with somebody else. Then you find out, okay, well, this worked really well with this person. But over here, it was like wrestling a refrigerator. And I'm not going to be able to do the same things that I did.
Or an air conditioner.
Same. We allow our students to, once they have a basic understanding or a good ownership of the concepts, the principles. It's like when you know the rules, you can break them. Right. That's kind of our approach. I mentioned Grandmaster Bobby Tawada earlier. He teaches in a format that I've never seen done before, and you don't see like most Filipino arts are delivered one-on-one. He does large groups. He does one-on-one too, but he's come up with a way of delivering information, transferring knowledge to large groups. But the terminology he uses, I had heard it for years. I'd never understood it. He teaches basic and he teaches semi-advanced. Mm-hmm. And I never understood what he meant by semi-advanced. What he meant was, I found out later, and this is where I found out that I learned a lot from him that I didn't really credit him for, I didn't really know, is he's teaching you his version of advanced material, but he expects you to take that and make it yours. Right. Tweak it to the way that so if he calls it advanced, it's almost like, okay, well, it's done there. There's an end to it. Mm-hmm. Whatever he says, that's the way it is. It's like if this is your curriculum, your fight manual, well, almost by extension, if it's not in that manual, it's wrong. It's exclusionary.
Right.
You write it down, it's on black and white, here it is. Anything outside of that is not right or not good or not relevant or whatever. So using the term like semi-advanced, I think is pretty clever, pretty smart, because that now I as a practitioner and then ultimately as a coach have an understanding that this isn't the end of it. It's up to me now to go where I can with it based on my attributes, my skills, my experiences. And then you as my student, I want you to do the same.
Right.
So maybe we're building a big cookie, but ultimately I want you to be able to make your own.
Right.
Yeah,
so my father used to talk about the difference between a baker and a cook.
Yeah.
And the thing was and this kind of goes back to the martial arts situation. People have an issue with the you do something, I do something, you do something, I do something.
Yeah.
From my experience, even in a fight, even in the majority of any advanced skill sets like collegiate wrestling, jiu-jitsu at the black belt level, what you're talking about, there's still a breakdown like that. It's so microscopic that you don't see it.
Yeah.
And it takes someone that's expert level or master level to really break it down where it makes sense. The majority of people have not received a skill level high enough to speak on such things, yet they are still speaking on them as if they know what it is.
Yeah.
And then it comes out like jarbled crap.
Yeah.
And then what happens is you're there. But my father used to talk about, what's the difference between your baker and your cook, right? Well, the thing is that if I were to take all of the ingredients to bake a cake and I put it on this table and I told you, why don't you bake a cake for me? It would take you, well, you probably would never come up with a recipe.
Right.
But if I were to give you a recipe and then I made you do that 1,000 times and then taught you why each thing does what it does, there is a point where I can start pulling stuff out and start teaching you, hey, you can replace that with this. You can do this and it'll taste different. You can add this ingredient that'll mess it up. But this same ingredient that looks the same in turn creates a different kind of cake.
Right.
And at some point what happens is you start to become a cook, right? And I understand the difference between the cook and the chef is the controlling people. So whatever works. But it's an analogy based off of why do you do prepackaged things first? It's because you're just like your instructor did for you. They are teaching you something that you don't know you're learning, even though to you it's complete and utter BS. The thing is that it's not. And if I were to take a small portion of that and do that, as long as it's proper, I shouldn't have a real issue convincing you that would work, right? So like if somebody grabs my neck and I break their arm and they bend over and they put their hand on the ground because you hyperextended their arm and I football kick them in the face, you can't say, well, I don't believe that would work because I would just break it down and go, so if you put your hand on the ground and I kick your face like it's 4th and long, you don't think that would hurt you? Like, we can test that out.
Right.
You don't think that if you extended your arm, I could pop your arm? So which part of that? Well, in conjunction to each other. That's true.
Yeah.
But in order for me to teach you how to not stop and to continue whatever, shouldn't I have a recipe that I give to you that allows you to learn that process? And then after a while, it's kind of like the thing is when you learn how to box or wrestle or grapple. I'll take grappling because obviously I have an extensive background there. When I teach grappling, I customize my program to every single student. Now, the problem with that is that means that I'm teaching for a 2-hour block, 2 hours. I am not allowing for just free roll because that is a lazy way to approach that scenario. Like I have dedicated time to put more energy in. The only reason I'm not is because I know that if I were to do that all the time, I would be smoked. I would have to have a true passion to that. And if I were to take my loved one, would I not do the exact same thing with them? So the thing is that I have to teach them what right looks like. I have to like kind of break all that down. But the step-by-step process of passing that on, I feel like you're doing 100%. And then you're moving directly into the psychological parts of that. There's just so much in personal protection to try to throw. And it is impossible for somebody to truly become a master at multiple facets of that unless they have a really screwed up life.
Yeah.
But the thing is so but it's the process of passing stuff on. Like one of the things that I run into is dealing with close combat instructors in the military that understand how to refine skills. Like you come to me and I'm like, hey, what do? You show me. We roll, we fight. You're like, hey, here's a scenario. You're in the bathroom. All of a sudden, guys pull out, a knife and want to shank you for whatever reason, because it's on a Tuesday. And the thing is that you show me your skill sets. Then what I do is I go, I can refine this here. This is more efficient. I have something that you probably haven't seen that works with your frame, why don't I add this?
Yep.
Let's shift your pistol size, like all of this is refinement of technique. And then I also run into people that don't understand that there's a difference between that and what you're talking about, which is creating somebody from nothing into someone that could become that, right? But those are two skills, and both of them can be mastered. But more than likely, you should dedicate yourself to one or the other, or else what happens is you start mixing, things in. Like one of the issues I have with a lot of instructors is the fact that they don't know what it's like to be these people that are coming in.
Yeah.
They don't understand that's not their life. It's like, well, why don't you just wear these clothes? Because I don't want to wear those clothes, you freak. Like that's not me. That's you, right? Like I don't want to wear a pistol all the time, and I don't want to lie to people and say I do wear a pistol all the time. The thing is that you're taking someone that just wants to be a little bit safer, and how do you do that? Well, depending on why they came in, you have to teach that, right? And is there any it sucks to call it advanced, but is there any kind of program that progresses to the point where it's just like, hey, there's no bullshit here. Like it, leave it, whatever. For example, when I teach women's self-defense, I only get them for one day. So what happens is they show up. I'm not a part of any school. I have a mat at the base, and I'm training their husbands, and their husbands are like, hey, this guy's like psychotic. Why don't you come train with him? And he'll probably teach you something that's a little bit different than the martial arts guy down the street. And I start off my program by going, look, I don't want you as a student. You didn't pay me anything. I'm here. My whole goal is that when you walk out, you're a little bit safer. So if you hate me by the end of it, that's fine. If you feel that I was a little too graphic, that's fine. There was a disclaimer, before we even started this. I have no desire to sugarcoat anything. I just want you to know that if a man grabs you and then tries to throw you on the ground, he's not doing it because he wants to pass your guard. Okay? The thing is that there's one, and I will not have enough time to teach you anything outside that. So I need to train you psychologically how to deal with that. I also need to be realistic about what you can do with a full-grown man. Right? And we don't want to get into any of what they should be able to do. The idea is that you have been ambushed, you have a violent person on you, and they in turn are there for a very, very graphic, violent, and really screwed up reason. And I'm the asshole that has to teach you how to survive that, or at least have the ability to do what they call active resistance, which is fighting. And if you don't know how to do it effectively, you're not really actively resisting. So is there a class that you cover on that where it's just like, here's the world, swallow that pill?
So in my Charlotte Center, I have sim rooms built where we run force on force and stuff like that. And there's couches and there's a mattress and there's end tables and bookshelves and it's like the world, I've been in shoot houses where it's don't
big open place.
Don't feed to the center of the room. Well, that's easy to do in most shoot houses because there's nothing on the walls, but that's not the real world. So the things like, and again, I've done jiu-jitsu since 1998. Well, shrimp, buck your hips, blah blah blah, whatever. That shit doesn't work on a couch. Doesn't. Well, how do you find that out? Pin somebody on a couch. So we have classes where, and it can be a one-off, and honestly, my goal with most of those is to let people figure out you don't know shit, you're not prepared, you need more than just this. Now, if that more is you go get a knife and you figure out how to use that knife and get the mindset and mentality, or a gun or whatever it is, fine. It's your life, it's your world. I can't. But if I take somebody and I put them in that sim room, or any of those sim rooms, and I've taken really good people that on the mats or in a ring or whatever, they run through people, but that stuff doesn't always translate.
Usually never translate. It's a completely different environment.
It's just even guy, again, good guy. I've got good friends that we're third group, fifth group. It's different. Now those guys have had different experiences for sure, and they've dealt with there are things in the room.
Mm-hmm.
But the average person that comes to us, it's deer in the headlights, you know, and just something as simple as turning off the lights changes everything. If it's going to be a home invasion, probably going to be dark.
Right.
You know, if you're going to be attacked outside, it's probably going to be dark.
Yeah.
The jogger recently, it was 4:30 in the morning. You know, that changes things. And my ability to be able to fight when I can't see has to have come from touching hands a lot of times, you know, and feeling energy in real time. If it's just, I do this, they do that, and all of a sudden I'm on my back on a couch, I'm bucking my hips. Well, nothing's happening.
Right.
I'm sinking down into this couch or this mattress, or, you know, and I think we've talked before about, you mentioned women's self-defense stuff. Well, I'm going to mount her and pin her wrists to the floor. Well, for what?
Right.
What am I teaching her? Like, why does she need to know a mount escape? Like, what's the attack here? What's the goal? What is a bad guy trying to do?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'll do the same thing in guard. Okay, we had that conversation, but in guard on a mattress is going to be different.
Right.
It just is, you know.
Or I talk to people all the time. I'm like, you know, if you're under the covers, that's an element that people don't even think about. You want to learn how to be completely helpless. Just have someone kneel on covers while they're around you.
I won't out him. It's somebody we both know and like, but I did a video a couple months ago in our sim rooms with, he set up the scenario, and it was home invasion kind of thing. He was coming in, and he put me and another well-known YouTube guy on the bed. He comes in and jumps on me. The other guy just bolts, like he just bails out of the room, which was probably a good play. At some point, I end up throwing a sheet over his head and wedge his head between the mattress and the wall. And he completely panicked, freaked out because he couldn't see, he was literally wedged between the wall and the sheet was restricting his movement. If you're not doing stuff like that, man, you have no understanding of how quickly a really good trained person can just be completely immobilized by something like a sheet.
Yeah. No, and I think 100% we believe a lot of the same stuff. I mean, the thing is that even going back to the team guys, a completely different environment. They're trained for a completely different environment. Like I literally have to train those personnel for specifics within the environments that we're talking about. Now, once they understand that, they take the principles and they drive with it, you know. It's just that the original intent of that tab that they have, that beret, is completely different than what we're talking about. So they should technically be doing a little bit better than the average person, but in turn, they're still going to fail in that environment. Right. You are introducing an element or multiple elements that you still have to experience in that world. Yeah. But at the same time, when you start talking about, hey, this is what I did and this is what messed them up, and you know, you have to be able to experience that. Isn't that a little bit of a I do this, you do that part? You really want to just like grind it all the way down to the, you know.
I don't think so. Okay. Because I'm not telling, now I will say, in after action, I'll say, all right, so here's some things you could have considered. Here's some things that maybe you could have done that would have helped improve your position or get you to a better place, or at least kept you from getting in that absolute worst case scenario. Right. You know, which is where I try to spend a lot of time. I try to spend a lot of time on, I'm not a big believer in putting people in extreme negatives, like from the start, and saying, okay, here's a technique to get you out of the dude's back mounted with a gun to the back of your head. Yes. I'm like, bro, if you weren't good enough to avoid that, you're not good enough to get out of it.
Right.
Like, I don't care. Like there's no magic that's going to.
Yes.
Could I show you something? Yes. Do I believe that you could perform it based on you missing the 17 things that got you there? No. Like.
And I get that part, but at the same time, isn't that a little bit, if I were to bring it all the way down, isn't that a very large and broad scoped version of going, this is a guy in side control.
Yep.
You can turn into him and do this. Or if he's too high up, I can slip out the back.
Yep.
Or if he's pushing me in this direction, I can control his head and I can sit up. Or if he's too high up, I can slip out this way, or I can reverse.
Right.
And based off of your size, I'm going to go with this. And in most scenarios, I want you to feed that. Now let's drill that. Now let's, work in here. And now what happens is I just taught you 7 different options. I didn't make you master any of them, but I did make you understand the purposes behind them.
Yep.
And now what happens is you can think your way through it because you have enough options to play in. Isn't that the same thing that you're doing, just on a broader, less comfortable scale? Like you are just working in an environment that is missing, like in the world.
Yeah, I think so. I think. And I've probably oversimplified some, but I think what I'm trying to avoid is, let's say a guy walks in off the street to a martial arts school, and he says, "All right, I want you to tell me what to do if a guy chokes me like this."
Yes. No. Right. Yeah, yes.
And the guy is going to give a very technical response to that, right? Mm-hmm. You do this and this and this and
Yes.
And so I'm trying to avoid, like, because I don't want people to, I don't want somebody to think, if somebody attacks me in a certain way, all I have to do is this move,
all I have to do is not get in it.
Yeah. Like, because the first thing I'm going to ask, well, how did you get there? Why is this person choking you? What happened beforehand? Is this somebody you know? Mm-hmm. Did you cut this person off in traffic and you're getting out of your car and now they're approaching you in the parking lot? Is this, your significant other? Like, because all that stuff's going to matter how I deal with it before your hands get around my neck.
Absolutely. Yes. And there's a danger and I know what you're saying. There is a huge danger in the magic pill issue. Like, I'm fat, I want to get skinny, take this pill, therefore you become skinny. It's like, well, why don't you just not do all the things that made you like that? But
because that's hard work.
Correct. Yes. But at the end of the day, in order to protect yourself properly, it's hard work no matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
And everything that is brought about, whether it be live rolling, touching hands all the time, exposing yourself to these areas, being taught cookie cutter, step-by-step processes, like all of them kind of contribute to the final product of you being able to defend yourself. Like you being Ryan, the entire history that you have in turn brings about your ability to walk around and be an expert in your field, being elite, right? Yep. So the thing is that you're trying to pass that on to individuals without killing their spirit about the fact that if you truly want to do this, you're going to be dedicated for the next 20, 30, 40 years on something. And you don't want them to realize it because we don't have a society that actually works into that.
No, we have a microwave society. People want things that right now, if we go back to the cooker and the baker, like people want to pull something out of a package and throw it in the microwave and boom, there it is.
Dude, they want to go to Walmart and have it already made.
Yeah. And I had a guy tell me one time, look, if it was about what people needed versus what people wanted, McDonald's wouldn't be one of the biggest corporations on the planet.
Right.
So I do, from a business standpoint, there has to be some element of giving people what they want, at least on the front end, so to get them in the door.
Well,
I don't disagree with that, but I have to be at least intellectually honest with them when it comes to. For me, I already don't sleep well, so I have to pretty early on let them know, look, this is going to be work. This is not going to be I'm going to give you a framework. You know, I'm not going to just leave you to your own devices, say gear up and let's get after it. I'm going to give you a framework, but it's not going to be so rigid that if one of these things is out of place, you're going to fail.
The world is nothing but a bunch of different gray colors.
Yeah.
It's not black and white.
Yeah.
I know that we can talk for hours and hours and hours. You will be a part of a few more conversations and group session, but dude, it's awesome talking to you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Had fun.